Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Garden Revival BBQ, the podcast we record live on the Garden Revival Discord server. We foliaged hard in part 1 of the Foliage Fiesta episode. Will we foliage harder in part 2? Let's find out. I am your host, IG, still the very indecisive gardener. Co-hosting with me is my lab partner, Space Butler.
I love chemistry.
On the panel tonight are professional gardener Zappy Snaps and ecologist Passiflora.
Aloha.
So part 1 of the Foliage Fiesta was fun.
It was.
we really did foliage hard for 2.5 hours.
It surprised me how much foliaging we were able to do.
It surprised me how you say foliage. But I really loved how everybody in event chat participated and kind of played along with our categories. I thought that was really fun.
Yeah.
I think we should do more of those.
I agree.
But we didn't even get to the BBQs, the big burning questions. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm still looking at event chat, and that does look like a little kitty or something from the back. Maybe having a poo. Is this thing on? Testing.
Yeah, all right.
It is definitely on.
we have a lot of questions to get through, and the first one comes from Simp for Plants. Simp for Plants says, "I have red mud-like soil, and in summer I have to keep watering so the plants don't wilt. But I was wondering if constantly adding humus could help with the drainage." Also, if composting and growing more weeds should help.
So, the short answer is yes, and I'm going to say much more than that. So, in clay soils, which I think was in the question, adding more organic matter is one of the most important things you can do to increase the drainage, and there's some other things that you can add to your soil, but depending on the type of clay you have, those may or may not be smart decisions, which means if you want to look into adding, like I've heard people say, add gypsum or add sand, you should really check with a local extension office, because some of the time when you do that, it will turn your clay into concrete, which is the opposite of what you want. But adding more humus or adding more organic matter is always good for clay soils. And yes, it does over in time increase the drainage ability of your clay soils. And you can do that a number of ways, and it kind of depends on how much effort you want to put in versus how much patience you have for the process. So for example, when I was working as a teacher and I did not have time to work on my own garden, what I did with my front yard, which was very, very clayey soil, and like there was like 1/4 of an inch, if that, of soil that looked like soil on top, and that was just straight clay. What I did is I got a whole bunch of arborist wood chips. I got a whole bunch of the fall leaves from my neighbors, or I would drive across town when someone was like, I have a bunch, anyone want them? And I layered that on my soil very thick, like 6 inches a foot thick, and I ignored it over the fall, over the winter. And then in springtime, the soil was a bit better, right? Over the course of those few seasons. 5 years later, now my soil has about a depth of 4 or 5 inches of nice, dark, crumbly soil. So if you have a lot of patience, just layering on whatever organic matter you have access to on top of the surface will over time improve, quality of your soil as that gets, degraded and worms go through and everything happens with that. You mentioned weeds, and there are a few things that different people like to try doing in their when they're working with clay soils, and I've done some of them. So, for example, some people will sow daikon radishes because they'll grow them out, right? But then they won't harvest them. They will let the roots rot in the soil because they grow super deep, right? So they're drilling through the hard compacted clay, theoretically. And then as they decompose, they're adding that organic matter at depth. And I did that, and it seemed to speed it up a little bit. And then if you want to do other things like sowing clover, crimson clover as a cover crop, or even interplanting clovers with your vegetable crops can, again, over time improve the drainage in your soil because you are, when those plants, especially clovers and other members of the legume family, are in there, they're bringing in nitrogen, they're forming mycorrhizal networks, which all of those things are really good things that you want happening in your soil. On the other hand, if you are rushed for time and you have some, good quality compost and you want to be able to plant now, a lot of people will till in like 4 inches of compost into their soil. So if you're super impatient and you want results now, you can do that. Otherwise, you can just, what they call it is sheet mulching or lasagna gardening. They're basically the same thing. And just let time and the soil microbiota and all of that stuff take effect. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Zappy.
Next question is from Velociraptor. He asks, can you explain the mimicking by Boquilla trifoliata?
Ooh, that one's a good one. I'm going to have to post a photo of this plant in the event chat because it's really odd. It's probably up there for one of my favorite plants. If anybody knows where to get one too, please let me know because it's super freaking cool.
How could we ever find it if it keeps mimicking other plants?
That's the thing about it, is it mimics other plants, and it's super strange for doing that. When I say mimic too, what I mean is we found that when it grows on other plants, because it's a vine and it likes to kind of grow on other plants, it will mimic the shape of these plants' leaves, as well as, their color, the size, how they hang off of a plant, and all of these things it does without eyes, which is really, really strange. We always think of plants as having fairly specific leaves to a certain species, and this breaks that rule, which is also really, really odd. And it does this to hide from herbivores. Because it has been found that this plant, because it can mimic other plant leaves, in that off chance that it's mimicking a toxic plant or a plant that, deters herbivores, it won't be eaten either because it's just so good at hiding. Its common name is the chameleon vine. I would recommend checking it out if you guys, are interested in kind of weird plants, and this one's the weirdest. It even can, change the tip of its leaf to have, sharp little points almost, just like as long as it's growing on a plant that has leaves that do that. How it does it is really strange, and by that I mean we don't know, unfortunately. It's a weird thing. In this case, because we know why it does it, which is hide from predators, but we don't know how. And there's a couple theories out there that have been disproven for the most part. One of them was it's stealing genes from plants it's growing on, which sounds really strange, but there are parasitic plants that we have found that do actually steal bits of genomes from other plants that they're parasitizing. So strange. The other theory is probably just to do with the fact that this plant is really, really sensitive to the light that's hitting its leaves. As far as I'm aware, I haven't seen any other kind of theories beyond those two, and plants in general are actually really, really sensitive to the light that is hitting their leaves. Things like the color of the light, as well as kind of potentially the direction or where it's coming from, will play a big role in this. How a plant can take the information from the leaves, each cell is getting little bits of information of the light that's hitting it, and how each of these cells can work together to make, this outcome of a changed leaf. We actually just don't know how it does that. It's still something that's new information, and really that's a research project for somebody to do one day, is to look into how this plant manages to mimic other plants.
So maybe like extrapolating the shape of the leaves next to it by the shade that's cast from them?
Yeah, absolutely. And
That's insane.
And not only that, but also like the color of the other leaves. The fact that it finds a way to change the pigments in that leaf to mimic the greens of another plant, or the shapes, how those leaves on the other plant are hanging off of the stem. Like, the fact that it can mimic all of those things is just mind-boggling, especially when you think about the fact that it just doesn't have eyeballs. So would recommend, in the second photo, you can actually see there's, like, they're labeled. The T is the plant that it's growing on, and then the V with the little arrow is the vine. And you can see the fact that it's changing how its leaves are kind of positioned and shaped to mimic things.
Amazing.
Is this a new plant that was discovered recently, like in the last couple of decades?
I think the big research paper that came out for it talking about that was in like 2016. So it's super recent, yeah. And apparently it had been grown in like botanical gardens for quite some time, but in a botanical garden frequently people just grow like a plant all by its lonesome, so it's just kind of sitting there by its lonesome. It's not mimicking other things because we didn't think of taking this plant and letting it vine onto other plants.
If it's next to two different plants, does it like kind of do both of them, like depending on what like vine is up there?
Yeah, which is also really, really strange. As the vine grows, say from, as it climbs up one tree, it'll mimic that tree, and then as it grows onto the next tree, the part of the vine that's on that tree will start mimicking that tree. So it constantly changes.
This is definitely the most mysterious plant I've heard of.
It's so cool. It's so strange.
Those plants that that move their leaves when you touch them, like that seems like, oh, that's a neat trick, right? This is like I can't even think of a mechanism. I mean, I'm not a botanist, but I can't even think of a mechanism.
I can't think of a mechanism. I've taken a lot of plant physiology courses, and I can't even think of what could be doing that. And it's, some other theories. I have actually heard of one theory which was to do with the hormones released by other plants, because they release them constantly when they're being attacked or not attacked to lie. And the fact is, like, nothing kind of fits the bill for this thing, and it's so strange. And yeah, it's like a sensitive plant. When you touch it, its leaves respond to the touch, but it's like it's already responding to something, whereas it seems like this plant's almost like actively doing this thing.
Yeah, because it has to grow into another shape. It's not like a chameleon, even, where there's cells that are made to change color or something like that.
Yeah. It's so cool. I really wish, if somebody ever finds seeds of this plant or like cuttings, let me know. I don't think there's an upper price limit for what I would pay for one of these things. It's so cool.
Get one of these. Yeah, well, that's a very interesting plant. Yeah. Thanks, Velociraptor, for bringing that one up.
Absolutely. Thanks, dude.
Our next question is from Molly L. Nitz. I'm buying a climbing rose Westerland, but it's sold as grafted because that's just how this particular well-reviewed source does their roses. I'd rather have an own root rose, so I'm thinking about trying to grow from a cutting from the above graft part with the intention of replacing the original. But I've heard about rose replant disease, so I'm worried that if I try to grow the one I bought for a few years while I raise the cutting to replace it, rose replant disease will kill the cutting-sourced replacement rose. I can maybe find somewhere else in the yard to raise the original while I work out this plan, but it wouldn't be ideal. Any thoughts on own root roses or on rose replant disease?
So rose replant disease is actually another one that's pretty interesting, because up until fairly recently, people really didn't know why or agree on why it was happening, but we do know now, so that's cool. And what they, or rather we have a better idea than we have in the past. I'm not 100% convinced that we know for 100%, that this is what's going on. But what they think is going on is that over time, pathogenic fungi and bacteria start infecting the original rose, right? And this takes several years, like 5 or 6 years is what I understand. And then when you tug that one out and put in a new rose, that new rose is exposed to those pathogenic bacteria and fungi and gets infected immediately and, has growth that is stunted, so it just doesn't do as well. And so in this situation where you have a rose and you're taking a cutting of it and you're hoping to grow the cutting eventually, it might be easier just to plant the grafted rose somewhere else in your yard. But one of the things that they know is that if you support your roses with beneficial fungi and bacteria, with those beneficial mycorrhizal fungi, they actually have a protective effect and you can prevent the rose replant disease. So if it were me, what I might do is I might plant my rose where I want it, and then I would do what I could do to encourage the beneficial fungi. So getting the mycorrhizal, they sell them, right? You can get mycorrhizal inoculants, right? So I might do that. I might be really careful to keep the soil healthy. So I might mulch. I might grow things that are known for supporting mycorrhizal fungi around it, like clover, other things that help support that ecosystem. Because part of what's going on is plant roots have these sites that either a beneficial fungi can inhabit, and I'm super simplifying it. It's super cool. Please do read up on it. It's so cool. So they have these sites that are used by beneficial fungi. And if you don't have those beneficial fungi, those then are open infection sites. So basically, just try and keep your soil fungi happy and where they should be. But you don't have to do that. One of the things they found is if you want to plant a rose into soil that's showing this rose replant disease, what you can do first is inoculate that rose and let it get established for some number of weeks, and then plant that, and it'll be fine. So you can do those. There's been some stuff about marigolds and how they support nematodes and all sorts of things. But basically, I would focus on supporting the beneficial mycorrhizae, and I probably wouldn't worry too much about it because if it's only going to be a year or two, I'm not too worried about that. And they have shown really good results, like I said, with inoculating your new roses with the mycorrhizae and planting those, and the roses did fine. If you're worried about it, they actually do this thing where they will plant their roses, in their healthy soil in a box or other biodegradable pot where they want it. And by the time the box or whatever else has broken down, the rose is well established enough, hopefully with healthy fungi, that it can fight off that rose replant disease, which is also really interesting. It's really interesting always when you come across new information, right? Because we're all still learning constantly, as with, we just saw with that plant. We don't know why it's able to mimic. So, it's just fun. Anyway.
Both of these things, the rose replant disease, the information that scientists have been learning about it, and the plant that Passi talked about, they're extremely new research published like in the last, 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
I would recommend, especially if something like rose replant disease is kind of coming up, And, if it's something that's kind of interesting to you, I'd recommend looking into plant soil feedback systems because it is an area that's been kind of researched a little bit, but the thing is it's hard to research what's going on under the ground because you can't see it. But like the research that is out there is super interesting. I'm going to agree with Zappy. Definitely look into it.
Yeah, it's so cool. It is so cool.
Next up is Andromeda Deluxe with the question, does glucose produced from algae benefit plants or soil in any way?
This is also a good question. This feeds into this plant soil feedback.
Well, I feel like, honestly, you can probably answer better than I can because my initial thought was, it would feed the bacteria, so there might be some interesting stuff there, but you sound like you know more about it than me, so you talk.
No, I don't know. You definitely have a lot of experience with it. You definitely have a lot of experience with it. I do know that plants their roots can take up sugar, actually, apparently, which is new information for me. Like, I didn't learn about this until like 3 months ago when I was questioning something I'd heard about growing plants. People were swearing by putting sugar in their fertilizer, and I was thinking, like, that's dumb. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's silly. It might help the bacteria in the soil, which is what you thought too. And I was like, there's no way that a plant would use it. But apparently they do. Apparently some plants can absorb amino acids in the soil as a source of nitrogen, which is also really cool. And then they can also absorb different forms of sugars like glycine, and they break that down. And I had bookmarked a research paper because I'm cool. So cool. And
Yes, you are.
here's a link for it.
And not just because in event chat you just told us you go to work in a helicopter.
No, that's actually for a really lame job. I'm not gonna lie. It's a cool whip, but the thing is, it's not a cool job. But yeah, it was a really interesting kind of little hole that I ran down in learning about this stuff, because I legitimately thought that plants would never ever bother take up sugar in their roots because they actually push sugar out of their roots. To like help support that plant soil feedback system. Which, again, people, please read up on it. It's so cool.
Wow. Okay.
But that's just that little blurb there. Zappy, please, if you have anything to say or to add to it, definitely do it. Because
I think you covered it because that's really interesting. Apparently, this is the episode where I'm like, oh, wow, okay, I have more things to research. Which is always fun and exciting.
Started it off
right,
with that chameleon vine, and now we're here.
Yeah.
These questions are not softball questions.
No, they're really... Yeah, because... So, Passi covered the part where the plants might be able to absorb and get some benefit from the glucose. And it's late, so forgive me if I'm misremembering, but I think they mentioned algae. So, my additional thoughts was... the soil, microbiota, the fungi, the bacteria, they're going to feed off of the glucose in the algae once most of the algae dies. Because some does survive when it gets just enough light, which is super cool. But also algae, they're not just sugar. They have their own nutrients that they're bringing in with them. So there would be that. So I think I feel like you probably wouldn't see a super strong effect, but now I kind of want to check it out for myself. But I think you would definitely be feeding the soil bacteria and fungi, so you would be improving your soil texture at least a little bit. How big the effect is, I can't say, but I am super curious now, so we're going to be running some experiments this winter.
I will say, I imagine if you had like glucose extracted, just pure glucose extracted, from algae, right? And there's just the glucose. I don't think that would be any different than if you have glucose that's been extracted from like porn or anything like that. Like I
Right.
think, but if it's like glucose plus a bunch of other stuff, right? Like what Zappy was saying there, I could see that
Right.
being a pretty big difference, and I could see
Yeah.
it. I will say though, if you're going to be putting like sugars into any kind of fertilizer container, like make sure that it's not something with small holes or anything like that, because there's going to be a buildup of molds and whatnot inside of that container, and it's going to
Oh
plug
yeah.
everything.
Gardens are just organic chemistry laboratories,
Oh
basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you should like it. Should be up your alley.
I don't like chemistry. No.
Wait,
Sorry.
you just said you did.
I changed my mind. Next up, Velociraptor asks, what causes fenestrations in monsteras, and is there any purpose of it other than aesthetics?
So this is again another one that we don't know for sure yet. And for a long time, people thought it might have something to do with, being better adapted to windy conditions. Maybe if there's holes, there's less drag, or maybe it lets the water through, or stuff like that. But there's this guy named Chris Meir who came up with this idea, and I haven't seen it tested yet. So again, this is not settled by any means. But his idea is that by being fenestrated, by having lots of these holes, a plant can cover a broader area. And so, like with the same amount of material, right? And so in conditions of, pretty shady conditions where you're just getting a spot here and there of light, if you have a broader leaf, you are, so to speak, casting a bigger net. So you will get more of the sunspots in the forest, even if you're getting less of each one because you have holes. And that it increases the probability that you will get some sun. Whereas if you just had leaves that had no holes, they would be smaller with the same material, right? With the same investment. And so they might get a spot or they might not, right? So maybe it has to do with increasing the probability that you are getting at least some of the light available. But again, this hasn't been tested experimentally. So it is at this point just an idea. So here's another one where we're going to say, we don't know. Isn't that fun? Someone go do a research project on it.
And that paper you're referencing, that's fairly recent as well, right?
Yeah, it is.
There seems to be a theme here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, these are really interesting questions, and we don't know for sure yet.
They're really interesting, but also it's really cool how, like, these it feels like a question that, maybe a kid who's just getting into plant, elementary kid or elementary school kid or a high school kid, or anybody who's just getting into plants and just looking at them now, right? They're just looking at them and they ask that question, and it feels like that should be an answered question, but turns out it's not. Like, it's like there's like the edge of knowledge of what humans know, and something that seems like it should be a simple question, we actually just don't know. That's really cool.
It is.
I think in the little event chat thing when that question was posed, I actually had looked up that paper too, because I was like, oh man, I remember reading about this recently. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, because it is such an interesting question, especially because they start off without any fenestrations and then get more fenestrated as they have. Yeah, so it's just really interesting. And I would like someone who has the time or resources to do, a more in-depth look.
It wouldn't be difficult too, because all you'd have to do is find a way to make shading and light in various patterns and have more shading or more light in like, larger, smaller amounts to kind of mimic either like, it's a more mixed environment or a less mixed environment for lighting, and see how fenestration develops and how big the leaves get because of it.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. Bubs, maybe certain bubbles should do something.
Yeah, Bubs. What's next?
Curry Swag is interested in Phytophthora. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this one right, but Curry Swag believes that their succulent succumb to death due to these bastards. Anyone know how to deal with it? I guess this is some kind of pathogen.
I have a feeling Curry Swag is upset.
I mean, I would be in the same boat, so I don't blame them whatsoever. And I wish I had an answer for that question. I really wish I did, but unfortunately, these questions where it's like, hey, there should be an answer for this. This is another one where we actually don't have an answer, and Phytophthora, I don't know how to pronounce it either. I'm in that same boat of not knowing how to pronounce it. That's like $1 billion question if you can answer it.
When they named this thing, they could have named it anything. Why did they go with this name?
Because they don't like other people, I guess.
Wow.
But yeah, it's a global pathogen for plants, and it wrecks agricultural systems, and it causes huge amounts of damage, and we don't know how to deal with it. So if someone knows how to deal with it, you've just answered $1 billion question. So somebody please figure that out after you do the fenestration and also the chameleon vine. I really want that chameleon vine answered first.
Okay, so yeah, this is the $1 billion agricultural
question.
But
put it on the back burner.
Not just a. All right. Well, let's try to help SSJ X Syntax. Do you have a recommendation for a mix for tree seed germination? I've tried coarse sand, soil, potting mix, and soil and potting mix combination.
So for tree seed germination, I think that's a really broad category because there's a lot of things that are called trees, obviously. And I think my first point to start is before you even get to the media, are you meeting your tree seeds needs for germination? Because like a lot of them are going to need a cold dormancy or a stratification period. And if someone walks up to me and is like, I'm having trouble sprouting my tree seeds, that's where my brain's going to go first because, well, I do live in a temperate climate, so I'm sure tropical species aren't the same. But like around here, they usually need to go through winter before they will sprout. Right. So if you've got that covered, then I'm going to say, look at what the tree likes to grow in. And okay, I'm less fussy than some people, right? Like you're going to live or you're not. Deal with it. But, I'm just not going to be that nice to them because they're going to have to go into the soil around here anyway. So I'll give them some nice soil, but I think more important than the soil type is the container you're planting in. Because if you're intending to plant this out and it's not a bonsai, one of the things you have to keep in mind is the taproot, because a lot of tree species, again around here, have a taproot that develops extremely quickly. And you do not want to hurt that taproot, and you do not want that taproot to run into the end of your pot and like make a right angle or get root bound. So I would make sure I was using tree pots or a really quickly biodegradable pot so that those roots did not get stunted. And besides that, I would make sure I was mimicking the kind of soil that that tree is growing in its native range. And that's going to depend on the species. And some species are going to be quite content with a broad range of soil types. And then I'm sure there's some that are going to be a lot fussier, and you're going to want to do the research for that specific species to find out what it needs, because maybe it needs a cold dormancy period, maybe it needs scarification, maybe it needs a very quickly draining mix, and maybe it doesn't. So I don't think you can broadly say, here's a soil type to use for old tree seed germination, because I don't know if you're talking about a walnut or a coconut, maybe you're talking about a papaya, a banana. I don't know what you're calling a tree, and I don't know what that tree needs.
All right. Oh, well, it sounds like maybe they should write back in and give us more specifics about the specific tree for next time.
More questions and answers here, but I think all the things I've considered will lead them to having a tree germinate.
Yeah.
just plant more seeds.
But that's another one, yes.
One.
That's my philosophy.
If that's an option, if you want an oak tree, you could go out and pick 30 oak acorns up. God. Go pick up 30 acorns.
Or come to my backyard and do a little bit of weeding.
Right, or that. But then again, you have to be careful about that taproot, because you don't want to mess it up. But anyway.
Okay, Velociraptor has another question. Some plants, like the night blooming cereus, time its flowering to occur on or near the full moon of summer. How does it time it in such a way?
This is another such a cool question. Man, like Velociraptor just went like pedal to the floor. Cool questions. And I'm loving it. So, night blooming cereus, there's a species in there called Cereus peruvianus. Okay. I think I can't remember the common name for it. There's a couple common names for it, but it's a cactus that blooms has like a night blooming flower that'll bloom in a window of around 3 days total. So like a day before, during, and then a day after, around full moons in the summer, which is super weird. That's really, really strange. There's a couple things for at least plants in general that help kind of explain some of this. A lot of plants will time their flowering based on a few things. Either it can be like the length of the day, the length of the night, and yes, those are two separate things. Or it could be something like, it'll bloom 3 weeks after the seed germinates. And you see that a lot in like northern plants because, they gotta get a seed going, and then they gotta grow up, grow fast, flower, and then die because it's going to be winter right away. But for a lot of plants that grow in areas where, they can kind of not die immediately, you can get things like blooming based on night length or day length. And for the Cereus peruvianus, at least as far as I'm aware, it's a little bit to do with the night length, getting to a specific time in the summer where the nights are, shorter versus winter. But then on top of that, the full moon that's a part that we're actually not quite sure on. I think the most recent research paper that delves into it that people were trying to figure out if it had to do with specific wavelengths of light reflecting off of the moon from the sun. And so they were looking at using different filters, and they tried, I think, blue, red. I can't remember if they did a third one, but then they also did just like full sheet, block that plant, prevent it from getting moonlight. And they found blocking the plant entirely actually reduced the flower buds from, opening up by like something like between 80 and 90% of the flower buds. So like moonlight is being a major factor. And then I believe the other contributing factors, I think red was a little bit stronger than blue light. However, I'm not sure why. It's for those two specifically. Plants typically do take into consideration a difference between red and far red light length for flowering time. This is a big physiology thing. Sorry, I'm going into a rabbit hole here and I apologize. But why Sirius peruvianus uses like full moon light, which is crazy sensitivity to do this, probably has to do with the fact that pollinators would be most likely to find the flower during a full moon, because there's just a little bit more moonlight versus, if there is no moon whatsoever out because it's completely waned. However, there's not been a research paper to actually prove that, and so this is another thing where Velociraptor, this one's actually all on you. You have to prove it. Because you asked the question.
Hey, at least in this one, the mechanisms seem plausible.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it has eyeballs, which is cool.
Yeah, I can see. There's tons of plants that open during the day or during the night. So I guess being sensitive to the moon's light is at least plausible, although it is much lower than the sun's light.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of funny because plants in general have a circadian rhythm. People know that humans have a circadian rhythm and animals have it, but plants are actually really, really good at telling time. They typically have like an hour by hour change for what they're doing in their physiology based on the amount of light or, when in the night things are happening. It's just Sirius peruvianus seems to be able to time its flowering to be based on full moons. So it has a circadian rhythm that matches that, as well as the circadian rhythm following around seasonal changes.
I remember Zappy had a story about, I think, her roommate forgetting to turn the light off.
Oh, yeah.
In the laundry room that threw your plant off.
Yeah, so Christmas cactuses need a period of, and this is where the day length versus the night length is different, is those plants need an uninterrupted period of time of darkness. So if you turn the light on even for 5 minutes in the middle of the night, you're going to prevent that plant from initiating flower buds, which means you will not get flowers on your Christmas cactus. Yeah, and they're not the only ones that behave that way. As to my knowledge, if a plant is dependent on night length, then stuff like lights coming on in the middle of the night or street lamps or that sort of thing can actually affect them, which is really annoying.
And some plants are, they're actually very, very, very sensitive to those kind of amounts of light changes. And I mean, they have to be because, before humans came up with light bulbs, it was a really dependable way of knowing how long the days were when you were in the year based on night length or day length. And so nowadays, like headlights from a car driving, approaching, right, on a highway, that's enough of a pulse of light that it can throw plants off from knowing when to start flowering. And we actually do see in deserts, there's been a decrease of cactus diversity around areas where there's highways because of headlights. Just pulsing, causing these, it completely throws off plants from knowing, how long is the day or what's going on. So yeah, they're super sensitive to that kind of stuff. Sorry to hear that about your Christmas cactus. That really blows.
It's okay. It'll go better this year.
So if you took your Christmas cactus and you threw it into a closet in the middle of the summer, you'd get blooms off of it, hey?
Yeah.
Christmas in July cactus?
Christmas in July, yeah. In other news, Bubs just took you up on your offer, says she wants to go into botany and do a thesis on fenestration.
Awesome.
Passi's answer in event chat is not...
This is the rated...
Not radio wave safe. Suffice it to say, he's very excited.
Heck yes. There we go. Keep it PG.
Next question is from Wicked Little Vixen. They live in zone 4B, and they bought a plant that is a zone 5. Should I bring it into the garage at night for a while, or should it be okay outside at this point? The question was asked 2 months ago.
Yeah. So we're getting to it a bit late.
Sorry. Don't really have a regular schedule for these episodes, but better late than never. It's good info for later.
Right. And it applies, the answer applies no matter what hardiness zone you're in, I guess, unless you're in the tropics. And the answer is it kind of depends, and it depends on 2 factors at least. So the first factor is temperature, right? So zone 4B, I believe, gets down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 28.9 Celsius. And so it depends on, are you in the depths of your winter? Because I think they said it was a zone 5 plant, right? So if your outdoor temperatures are now reliably above the minimum for zone 5, then that should be okay, right? And if you keep an eye, especially, I learned my lesson this year, because you really need to keep an eye on those temperatures, because sometimes they do not do what they're supposed to do, right? So just keep an eye on it and make sure that you're going to be able to protect it somehow if it's dropping below whatever hardiness zone it's rated for. So that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer is it depends on whether that plant has been hardened off. So if that plant has been outdoors in zone 5 and you're, about, warm enough by zone 5 standards, and it's been experiencing that cold and the sun and all that stuff, then it's probably fine. But if, here, it's been growing in a greenhouse, or not even a greenhouse, a hoop house, or any sort of sheltered location, it's going to have put out more tender growth than will survive, its minimum temperature. So, for example, hostas are plenty hardy in my zone. But if I had a hosta that had been grown in a hoop house and it was all leafed out and happy, and then I shoved it out midwinter and I'm well above its minimum temperature, but it's still freezing, those leaves are going to be damaged. So it depends both on what your actual temperatures are, make sure they are above the minimum temperature for that plant, and also how hardened off that plant is. Because even if it were a plant that was hardy to zone 4, if it had been growing in protected circumstances and you just kick it out, you could still damage it. And it probably wouldn't die, probably, but you do want to take that into account.
You might lose if it flowers on old growth and it's broken dormancy, it might zap those buds.
Yep, exactly.
And the other thing, sometimes you think you go to a local garden center and you see a plant and you think, oh, this is where the plant is at this time of year. But it might have been, you might be in Ohio, but it's shipped from Florida. And it is far ahead of where you would be. And technically maybe it was hardened off, but it wasn't hardened off in your environment.
Yeah.
I will say because I live in 3B or 4A, depending, right? Which is a little bit colder than, where the question was asked from. I have met people who've grown plants that are hardy to zone 5 outdoors. So it is possible to be able to grow plants a little bit in areas that are a little bit colder than what, the USDA garden hardiness scale thing kind of says too. It is just something that, as Zappy said, you do really have to harden off the plant, and you have to think about where you're planting it, and will you be able to kind of like protect its roots by keeping it from getting too cold in the winter.
Yeah, and people do that kind of zone boundary pushing a lot where I am. So you'll see people go to some really interesting extremes to be able to grow a plant that's, not supposed to live
I've
here.
had a dahlia come back for 3 years in a row now. I don't dig it up. It's just in a spot. There must be a microclimate there.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably helps that it's a little bit elevated where water doesn't pool around it. That's another thing. Sometimes it's the wet soil that kills a plant, not the cold so much.
I actually have a little story about
microclimate. Yeah.
About pushing plants to the extreme for getting them to grow in areas where they just shouldn't. I'll post a photo in the event chat because this is really cool. In Russia, apparently they loved importing, I think it was citrus, right? But citrus, it just
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
in pretty much most of Russia until we started breeding them to be pretty cold resistant. And so what they would do is they first bred citrus trees that would be dwarfs, and then they would dig holes and they would cover it with I believe a glass or something like that. And it was like a semi underground greenhouse to keep these plants kind of protected from the cold.
Yep.
Does that count as geothermal heat?
I don't know. This is an I don't know episode.
Stump Passi episode.
I think it would probably count as passive.
Like a dungeon greenhouse.
Yeah, but how cool is that? Just somebody came up with the idea of just, all right, dig a trench, a 5-foot deep hole, stick the tree in there, call it a day, and it works.
Yep. And I would do that. Except we get so much rain in the winter that hole would be full of water.
Yep.
I have thought about doing that. I saw those Russian citrus trees, and I was like, oh, and then I was like, oh. No.
Yeah, you might have to have a drainage system at the bottom of this trench.
Yeah.
Another trench that's deeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a colander in a pot.
There we go.
All right, next question. Ruiner of Most asks, how do bonsais work? How do they stay small?
They stay small through a lot of effort and careful tending. So basically, when you want to create a bonsai, you have to prune a lot, but it's not it's not only big pruning. They do so much tip pruning and fine little detail pruning. And the part that I think people forget about is they're not just doing above ground pruning. They're also root pruning. So bonsai is the art of torturing trees.
I don't think that's what it translates to.
It definitely does not. But and I mean that pretty lightheartedly. When I was younger, I was like, this is awful. How could they do this to these trees? But now I'm like, yeah, it's just pruning. It's a lot of pruning. It's a lot of careful pruning. And they do things like wrap wire around the branches and the trunks to make them hold specific shapes that are more aesthetically pleasing. But yeah, you do a lot of pruning of the vegetation, but also the roots. And you're basically trying to restrict how much growth it can put on. And it can go far more in depth. And I am not actually an expert on bonsais, but they are pretty cool. And that's a start, How do they stay so small? We make them. We cut off their growth. And the fun part, it's not so much fun, but what happens if you stop your little tiny tree, if you stop pruning it and dug a hole and planted it properly? within a few years, it will not be recognizable as a bonsai because it will grow. As soon as it gets a chance, that tree is going to it is going to grow very quickly.
What's next, Space Butler?
All right. Velociraptor has another question.
He's
Why
an
do
inquisitive boy.
Yes. Why do plants do extremely well near trees? I saw a tomato plant today growing next to a tree, and it was the most prolific one I've ever seen. It was almost 6 feet tall and still growing.
I think Velociraptor should go into plant ecology. I'm just going to throw this out there to study because I think Velociraptor would absolutely love it. Because like plant ecology is very heavily about how plants do trade-offs. Things like, if you can try growing really, really tall to get the most light, but now you're really, really tall and there's a chance that you can get knocked down through lodging from wind, right? And it's the trade-offs that plants make in order to kind of come out with the best outcome for themselves over other plants. And the thing is, when it comes to like plants doing extremely well near trees, initially that's like a really hard question to answer. But he also said that, or they said, I'm actually not sure about Velociraptor's gender, just a raptor, but they saw a tomato plant growing next to a tree. And the thing is, I know tomato plants love water. I have never drowned a tomato plant, and I have actively tried to drown a tomato plant, and I've just not been able to. And the thing is, because they love water, there's different things that can pull water away from a plant. Too much sunlight or tons and tons of wind. And a tree is really good at blocking both. And so my thoughts for like why would a plant do extremely well near a tree is because even though they love sunlight and there's not much sunlight underneath a tree, they also love water a whole lot more. And so the trade-off of getting less sunlight is also it's able to just hold on to a little bit more water, or there's a little bit more moisture there and it's a little bit cooler, so it's able to hold on to that water a little bit more.
I think that's an excellent theory, knowing that Philo lives in India. Full sun in India is too much for anything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now.
And that's a really, really cool question because, like in my environment up stupid north, the amount of sunlight that's here is so much less. And so for me, I've never seen a tomato do well underneath of another plant. But the sunlight, it's just different. It hits different.
Yep. Literally.
That's what they say. Fishboy asks, what are some good foliage plants for low light conditions indoors by a north-facing window? Also, what are some interesting or unique foliage plants or particularly beautiful ones that would be possible to grow indoors? I think we covered a lot of these in our previous episode.
I think Bubs is trying to say something.
I hear pothos is a popular house plant.
Literally spamming event chat with that.
Are they good in low light conditions?
They are. I mean, Bubs lives in the basement. And she's the pothos
I heard
queen.
from a pretty reliable source that pothos is a pretty good plant for that situation. In fact, I heard that source say it over and over and over again.
Do you guys have any other suggestions?
Snake plant, definitely what was just said in group chat. Snake plants, they look really good. There's some different cultivars that look beautiful, and they actually do extremely well in low light, and you can kind of just forget they exist for a really long time, and they'll thrive.
I actually have an aloe vera next to a north-facing window, and I mean, maybe it would look better in a different environment, but it's growing, it's alive, it seems happy.
Yep.
Maybe it's just given up on a better life and thinking do. I don't know.
I think one of the things to realize is a lot of plants are very, very stubborn. So even if that aloe vera would like to be in a south-facing window, it will make do with whatever you give it. I had a housemate once who had an aloe vera, and I think she remembered to water it twice a year.
That's
And
me.
it was across the room from a north-facing window, and it
Oh no!
survived.
Oh my God.
So, plants. Some plants are very stubborn and will not give up, even if they maybe, strictly speaking, are not in good conditions for them. But also, in addition to pothos and the other ones that are commonly suggested, if you want something maybe a little more interesting, there are some begonias.
Love the begonias.
Right, that like the low light conditions, and we mentioned them last episode because they have that iridescence that actually evolved as a way to get just a little bit more light out of extremely low light conditions. So that's
Nice.
kind of fun to mess around with.
So I guess the question is, what's your budget?
That's a big question.
Yeah, I think if you ask this question just randomly on the server, you'll get 10 different times. You'll get 10 different answers.
Mhm.
Probably maybe 20 different
And
answers.
30% of them
Yeah.
will be pothos.
Yeah,
That's probably true. Yeah.
just get one of those the trend plants like the pink princess philodendron or
Oh no! Don't do that.
I hear they're cheaper now.
Alternatively, and I've seen these plants thrive really well even in like windowless bathrooms or things like that, is you can always get a plastic
What?
plant. And those
Oh, oh my
typically
God.
flower for a really long
There's-
time.
I just remembered another really good suggestion for a deep shade or north-facing window plant. It's called peacock moss, and it's not actually a moss, if I recall correctly, but it's really cute, and it likes terrariums, and it is also iridescent. So it's called,
Ooh.
yeah, I'm gonna butcher this, Salginella
Salaginella.
unicata. Thanks. Yes, I am terrible with Latin, but it is so cool, and I mean, literally, I have some in a jar.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And it's so easy to take care of. Now, here's the weird part. It was introduced to me as an indoor terrarium low light plant, but it's actually hardy to zone 7. That's like, what? I have not put it outside yet, but
Zone 7 might as
tempted.
well be the tropics for
Oh, it
Passi.
is.
That's true.
apparently they're in a group called the Fern Allies, which is pretty cool. That's like a plant band name.
It's pretty perfect, honestly.
Why didn't they call them Ferny Friends? Everybody likes alliteration.
Yeah, maybe you can talk to the botanists about that one.
What's that picture,
This
Passi?
one is, I think it's, the common name is the blue oil fern, Microsorium thailandicum.
Wow.
And there's another
Lovely.
bluish kind of plant, and I believe this one also actually is pretty okay with growing in like a bit of lower light conditions. Don't quote me on that, please, and thank you. But it's like an epiphytic fern, I want to say. Also, don't quote me on that. But yeah, I have read that a lot of those blue iridescent kind of plants have evolved that like different mechanisms to capture just a little bit more light. So you can always kind of look at those.
Cool.
Excellent. All right, our last question here is from Team Valor. How do you revive sad-looking rhizome foliage plants? He's talking about Stephanomyria occultata.
So this is the plant that Team Valor received from his botanist friend, a plant that was recently discovered, and it arrived in sad-looking shape, it seems.
That's really tricky. That one's, yeah, it's aster, if I remember correctly, or compositate plant. I think it's
Aster AC.
yeah. That's tricky because I think it's from Utah, and I think if I remember correctly, it likes really crappy rocky soil. I think.
Yep.
I'm
You are
such
correct.
not an expert on growing plants that love really rocky, crappy soil if they're not succulents, so I can't answer that one. I know my limits and I stay within them.
Does it make a difference what kind of shape the roots arrived in? If it has a small root system, maybe put some sort of a dome on it to keep the humidity out, because there's not a lot of roots and might be too much transpiration happening, if that's the case.
So I think this particular plant is out of both of our wheelhouses. And like Passi said, it's tricky because it is an Asteraceae that's in, it's native to this really kind of tough environment. So often, if someone asks me how to, help this poor plant that got transplanted and it's not perking up, I would be like, well, give it a little more shade, try to, up the humidity a little bit. But if this plant is used to these really harsh, dry conditions, that can backfire.
Okay.
So it's a really tough situation, and I think
Yeah. When it comes to plants that really like these really, really crappy kind of conditions, if you do try giving it too much love, that backfires really fast.
So
Very
quick.
true.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need more than one plant to experiment with and see what works.
And
And as much as you want to save this plant, you just do the best you can with the theory that you have.
I did do a quick googly Google here, and it says that the populations occur in unstable gravelly slopes in close proximity to the Weber River. So, there's a chance that it could get a little bit more water, but then the thing is, if you're putting it in like a peat moss potting soil, I'd say don't do that. Because the thing is, even though it's growing right beside a river, if it's in gravelly soil, it is absolutely not in a place where it's retaining moisture or keeping it on those roots for a constant amount of time. So you'd really want to make sure that something that grows in a gravelly situation is in gravel.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, especially it's super newly discovered and described species, and it's also definitely not a succulent, so I would kill it if I had my hands on it by accident.
Is that a recommendation?
Killing it? No.
Yeah, it looks like this was discovered. Well, the publication on describing this plant was published 4 years ago. So that's a pretty new plant.
I'd love to know how you got one. I mean, I'm sure whoever described it collected seeds and whatnot, and they kind of spread around now, but still.
Okay.
Very cool. Congrats on getting a cool plant. That's
I hope it pulls through.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
Thoroughly jealous. I know somebody who got a really rare begonia species once, and they had a similar problem where it was super sad, and they found that they were giving it too much love. Obviously, it's not even similar whatsoever to, the fact that this is an aster that grows in gravelly soil, and the begonia that was collected was growing in lowlands in the tropics. But the thing is, too much love can really wreck a plant.
Yeah, if it's growing in gravelly gravelly slopes in Utah, it's not. It's not
gotta be a super tough plant.
Anything that grows in Utah has to be really tough.
Yay! Game time!
All right, so we got some riddles for the audience here, and if the audience has some trouble, we'll consult our panelists here. So, first riddle: I look smooth and friendly with baubles for Yule, But if you dare bite me, I'll grow prickles as tools.
Ah.
You folks can guess in the chat. We'll see if anybody has some ideas. Not cactus.
It's not the kissy plant.
The kissy plant?
Mistletoe. It is not mistletoe.
Mistletoe.
What, you didn't understand kissy plant?
No, is that an alternative name?
Is that not absolutely 100% what I would have called it? It's not thistle.
What? Oh. I love reading the chat here.
Yeah, okay. I think it's time to ask our panel. Any guesses from the panel?
Is it holly?
It is.
Freaking way.
Yes.
Oh, because the prickles on the leaves. That is an excellent riddle.
That was a little tricky.
I remember you talking about that, Passi. That's how I got the idea for the riddle.
There was back of my mind, I was like, oh, is that a holly? Maybe, but I was like, nah, they wouldn't remember that little spiel about that cool play. That's a good one.
What? I remember your spiels. I love your spiel.
That's a foliage related riddle too, which is awesome.
All right, second riddle. You think I look cheerful with my pseudanthium bright, but I long for my star, waiting all night. See if what the chat can do with this one.
Gotta look the word up, is what the chat says.
Yeah. So a pseudanthium is a flower-like structure.
It's not a false sunflower.
It looks like a flower, but it's not a flower.
So the word "sued" for false, and anthea, which I believe might have something to do with flower, although I'm not quite sure on that etymology. But it would be fake flower.
It's not corpse flower. I don't know. I might be getting schooled. Maybe there's more than one correct answer to this. Bubs is asking for some extra time so she has time to
trying
cheat.
to think. So this is leading me to think that it's a fake flower on this plant or some kind of false, flowering like thing, but then it's a night bloomer. It's tricky.
I don't think you have it right. Oh, Jazreen got it. It's a sunflower.
Oh, the star. No, the sun. Oh, I feel like a dumbass.
Yes, it turns as the sun goes from east to west, and then at night it turns back to east and waits there until the sun comes up. Is Passi thinking this through?
You got it 110%. I'm just feeling dumb right now.
Oh, come on, no. I try to make these puzzles where figuring out what I'm asking is the real challenge and not the figuring out what the plant is.
I was thinking it's got to be a night bloomer. Why else would she start? Okay,
right.
No, I'm a dingus. That's a good riddle, though. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
All right, the next riddle is, I'm common and useful, but I'm crowned with a rose. At your command, I bow to what grows.
Not pothos, Bobes. Not peonies. Passi, I don't know if you heard, we already said not pothos.
You said that's bubbles.
Oh, the answer's totally different for you. Not dandelion.
I'm crowned with a rose. At your command,
I think we're able to give a little hint on this one if people have trouble.
Sure, go ahead.
So I believe this one is not a plant.
Yep.
It's a gardening related thing.
I feel like it's a watering can.
It is.
Oh.
Watering cans, the thing with holes in it is called a rose.
Oh, wow. I did not expect that.
You got it. I've elicited 2 pro responses.
That's how you know it's a
really good riddle.
Yeah. Broad. The highest form of praise online.
All right, the next riddle. My namesake declared that from George we are free, extinct but not gone, related to tea.
What?
Not camellia. Not tea roses. I feel like I don't want to give clues on this one, but I want to talk you through figuring out what I'm asking for.
Well, who declared it? I am not a history major.
Anybody know history?
Yeah.
I don't even remember what I had for breakfast. I'm really bad at
Right.
remembering anything.
All right, so I'm gonna have to. What? Nothing.
You stealing my phone, you butt?
Hey, people are hearing.
Yeah, you steal my phone.
Hello, Mr. Snaps.
They say hi. Now go away.
Hi.
All right, you guys can Google if you want.
They won't get it by Googling. No question. This one is a hard one, I think.
This one, you might actually not have heard of the plant. But I'm hoping you'll at least figure out what I'm asking for.
See, so extinct but not gone leads me to think that this is a plant that
Yes.
it's extinct in nature, but it's still grown, cultivated
Exactly.
to some extent by people.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
The namesake declared that from George we are free. So either it's from Georgia, like, something like that, or it actually has like a little bit more etymology to that, and I'm not quite sure. And then related to tea, trying to remember what family tea plants are in. I think it's the myrtle family or something. I definitely gonna have to Google that one. But that's a big family.
See, I was thinking that from George We Are Free was referencing, because wasn't it King George? I'm really not good on
I
history.
think agreeing with you here.
Okay. So who declared?
It's not tea tree.
See, I can't Google because every time I Google, my phone then kicks me off
Yes,
of the...
Bubs got it. Franklin tree.
Ah,
Oh,
Franklinia.
wow.
I was thinking. Good job,
Bubs
cheating.
admitted to cheating.
Well, she searched for something. What did
Hey,
you search
if
for?
you know what to search for, that's all.
I did a
You won
little
the puzzle.
Googling, and
You
now I
got
see
it.
why. That's a really good riddle. That's a really, really good riddle.
Oh, okay. Looking for extinct plants in that family.
Clever.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Clever.
So the Franklin tree. They discovered it in 1765.
Wow.
And they came back and took some samples and planted it, and then it was never seen again, basically.
Coincidentally, it was discovered in Georgia.
There it is.
Oh,
There it is.
So
Okay.
yeah. I wasn't even thinking of that.
But it was named by the people that discovered it after their father's friend Benjamin Franklin. So yeah, they it was last verified in the wild in 1803.
wow.
They're all over. They're all over
I
the
actually
United States.
saw it at a garden center a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, they're well cultivated. Although they seem to be kind of tricky to grow.
One thing
sometimes.
I will say,
I
when they
didn't
were
buy
doing
it.
early plant sampling, people were pretty greedy with how many plants they sampled. It wasn't like, oh, you take one or two kind of like, pretty showy plants that kind of show off what you're looking at. It's like, yeah, you just take the population. And so I can kind of see why maybe they didn't find it after.
no.
Obviously, you don't take everything there, but you take a baker's dozen or two. Like you take a lot of plants. And so I can see why, maybe they went and collected some samples and they came back like, why are they all gone? It's like, I wonder.
Oh, are they not replanting them back into the wild, or are they just dying because the environment isn't right anymore?
They said it was unsuccessful.
Oh, that's sad.
So, yeah. Although some botanists say that there might still be them in the wild, they just haven't found them again. But yeah, so it's an interesting plant.
It is cultivated by people, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can find them in garden centers.
Should try planting it everywhere. Seeing what dirt sticks, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. All right, next riddle. Drowned in solution, forged into spears, produced in great numbers, and it won't take years.
Not cacti. Not cuttings. Not bamboo. Not pears. I think, Matt, you need to figure that out without me giving you a hint, which in itself is a hint. The question was literal spears or spear-shaped.
Oh, asparagus?
Not asparagus. You're kind of getting close. Not asparagus, no.
I think
Not rubber tree.
You should think about the first and second lines together.
Mm-hmm.
Any guesses from the panel?
Nope.
I have guesses, but then I reread it and I'm thinking like, oh man, that drowned in solution, that doesn't fit any of that.
It's definitely tickling my brain, but
It's doing what to your brain?
tickling. Like I feel like I almost know it.
If you're experiencing tickling sensations in your brain, you should go to a hospital. I'm just gonna be honest here with you, okay?
Not Sansevieria.
Forged into spears. Well, that's odd.
You have any other hints?
Well, I kind of misheard what Zappy said about tickling her brain. I thought something else was happening to her brain.
What?
That's a hint.
Oh, that's a pretty obscure hint. I would give that.
The hint is that the word I was thinking of rhymes with tickling.
Oh, yeah, pickling
Cucumbers?
spears. Hey.
Yes, cucumbers, pickle spears.
Oh my goodness. The language.
Yes, yeah. So the cucumbers are turned into pickles by drowning them in solution.
Wow.
Wow. And you can get quite a crop of cucumbers.
Yeah.
In 1 year.
That is so true.
Don't even be angry, anyone who's listening. That was a great riddle. I love these riddles.
Yay.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Okay, so next riddle. The chopper comes after a storm. You shake us off when season's warm.
Not helicopter seats. Hey, Passi, that a picture of a helicopter you just posted, that helicopter may very likely be involved in what I'm talking about here.
I know what it is then. No.
Depending on where you're located right now.
It's in Canada.
Not a dandelion, no. It is a plant. Not acer seeds. Not cottonwood. What is cottonwood?
Terrible.
Are you guys just naming random trees at this point?
Kind Kind of sounds like it.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
What's the name of that one? Well, I guess there's a bunch of different plants that have those like prickly seed pods, like burrs, that just stick to you. That wouldn't be right, though.
I don't think it's that one
I was
either.
just thinking of
Burdock.
yeah, I was
is
thinking of
one.
like
There's so many.
off, but that's you don't really want to shake them off.
Here's a hint. It's not an obscure tree. It's just the process is interesting that I'm describing. Yes, it is a tree. Well, it's done to a tree. Not
I mean, I
always.
go and shake the mulberry to get the mulberries, but that doesn't quite fit at all.
Okay, let's look at the clues we have so far. Yes, cherries.
Because don't they artificially pollinate them?
Well, what happens is if it rains, they can crack.
Yeah, so
they can go bad. So,
Right.
so the growers have to hire helicopters to fly over them to dry them efficiently.
That's
And
so
a lot of
funny.
the growth happens in British Columbia, where Passi Lakely is right now. Maybe.
I
you?
am
I
not,
don't know.
but I'm actually basically a stone's throw from BC and the Northwest Territories. So, kind of.
Get close to me. Kind of.
Yeah, this one. I'm running out of material to make these, so this might have been.
I actually really like that one. That one was good. I'm not gonna lie. I think the pickles one, or maybe the rose one, is my favorite. Just because the rose one, that's like there's a little bit of extra vernacular layer to that. That one's good for that.
I feel like I should take a bow.
Well, we've got one more riddle. So the final riddle is: I have a big family spread far and away in merry old England called Eye of the Day.
How should we respond to Passi's answer, Space Butler?
Just say no. You can just let me down easy, okay? Just
It's not a no.
There it
It's not yes. Okay, you're all right.
Oxeye Daisy.
And then Zappy.
Aster AC,
I think Zappy's more right.
aka Composite AC, aka.
I mean, it's not wrong. Daisy, yes. Daisy is the answer I was looking for.
I went
Jasmine
too
got it.
specific. Okay, but if you guess Asteraceae, you're basically knocking off like how many tens of thousands of plant species?
That's true. That's basically if it's not a mint or
I have a big family.
or an orchid, it's probably
That's a great riddle. Can I guess
Asteraceae.
noun as my riddle guess?
I have a big family was a pretty good clue there.
Yes. Well, Asteraceae, I guess, is the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But specifically, Eye of the Day, Daisy comes from Day's eye.
I know, but I thought that was too close and easy.
No,
I
it was
like,
just a
"Nah."
really easy riddle.
You've trained us with the hard ones. We don't expect it to be easy.
It's like a double bluff. I don't know what do you call this.
Yeah. So the common Daisy.
That was
Yep.
a good. Was a gooder.
It's that
I was
simple.
overthinking it a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I think I had you overthinking everything else, and you were just in that mode.
You said you literally said your first line. I have a big family, and immediately I was like, Poa, grass. But it's a grass. Okay, it's Poa.
Oh.
I thought Aster AC, although my brain still thinks Composite AC when I read that line.
When did it get renamed? It was
Not that long ago.
Was it renamed?
Yes.
I think it was
Name of
renamed
this
to
episode.
Composite, right?
What?
It used to be Asteraceae.
Was it?
No,
Is it the
no,
other
I think
way?
it's the other
Okay.
way. Let's
I'm gonna
ask
Google it.
the. Yeah.
Original name for Asteraceae was Compositae.
It's such a ridiculously
Huge.
large family.
It's still valid. The original name is valid under the International Code of Nomenclature.
That is a
Oh.
huge book. If you want a huge book, look up those books. Get those books. There's There's a lot of them.
Who here wants a huge book? Raise your hand. I'll wait.
I knew Bubs was going to say something.
I feel like that'd be fun to like keep on your coffee table and just have people who are not plant people come in. Well, taxonomy people, I guess, and be like, "What's this
Series
book?"
of books, and they're for like lichens and mosses, and then all these other things, and they're all huge. They're all enormous books. So if you really want to seem like a big brain, you got to get all of them.
I do wish that Zazreen, like they say, would have guessed their original theory that it's potato. It's not potato, but it would have been nice to mention potato in this episode because we haven't mentioned potato yet. And it's like a thing. We have to mention potato, right, Zappy?
Potatoes are awesome.
Have great foliage. Don't eat it, but it's great foliage.
And lovely flowers.
Really? Especially the purple potatoes. Because they have purple flowers.
Well, that was fun, you guys. Thank you so much for coming back for part 2 of the BBQ, where we got to do some big burning questions and some fun riddles. Thanks, Zappy. Thanks, Passi. Thank you, Husbunny. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and participating. And the all caps in event chat. That's how I know you like it.
Guys.
Bye.